Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maria Gallucci, a senior reporter for Canary Media. So all of the sessions that we've been hearing about today link back to one central theme. How can we scale next-generation geothermal? There are many gaps that still remain when it comes to achieving that goal, whether they be financial, economic, political. So on this panel, we'll talk about one central opportunity that could provide solutions for filling those gaps, as far as driving down costs, creating jobs, and building political support. And that's tapping into the oil and gas sector's deep experience to help scale geothermal. Perhaps no other industry has more understanding of what's happening below the surface or has the expertise in drilling and well engineering. We have a great panel of geothermal experts to talk to us about the role that oil and gas can play in driving next generation geothermal. Joining us today are three panelists who are now working in geothermal after coming over from the oil and gas sector. We have Sarah Jewett, Vice President of Strategy for Fervo Energy, Jim Grant, Senior Advisor for Project Interspace, and Rob Klenner, President of Greenfire Energy. So I'll dive into some questions shortly, but first, could you each tell us a little bit about your organizations and share some opening thoughts to kick us off, starting with you?
Sure. Thanks for having us here, Interspace, and thanks for the cool party vibes. This is really a super neat space. I am here representing Fervo Energy. We are a grid-scale geothermal energy developer. We have one operating project today in north central Nevada that's producing about 3 megawatts of power, and we are currently constructing our second large greenfield development in southwest Utah right now, which will be a 400 megawatt project. So we are based in Houston, Texas, and we are really excited by what's happening in the geothermal energy industry right now. There's so much exciting momentum. There's so much exciting new technology. I just came from a really cool panel where we were talking about financing innovation to keep up with the pace of innovation in geothermal. And I think we are innovating very, very fast. And it's really a fun trend to be a part of. And I'm happy to be here and talk more about it.
Great, thanks.
My name is Jim Grant. I've been in the oil and gas industry for over 20 years. I started my career at Anadarko Petroleum, worked there for about 16 years, was fortunate to work globally, a lot of international offshore exploration in Africa, Brazil, Southeast Asia. I started my career onshore US working unconventional assets in the early 2000s before the unconventional revolution, so vertical wells and fracs from vertical wells. I switched to Chesapeake about 7 years ago and was fortunate to work exploration for them and focus primarily onshore US. And in June, I joined Project Interspace as a senior advisor.
I'm Rob Klenner. I'm president of Greenfire Energy. So I've been in the industry for almost 15 years. Collectively, I've been with geothermal, into CCUS, oil and gas, and kind of back into geothermal, of course. So Greenfire Energy, we work with existing developers in the geothermal, hydrothermal space that need to revitalize their fields. They see our solution as an opportunity to enhance their recovery using existing infrastructure. So we're working in many projects, most notably with Calpine at the moment, where we're revitalizing one of their wells, and also working through several projects in the Philippines, in Kenya, and also in Indonesia. So I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you, Project Interspace, for inviting me to be here.
Great, thanks everyone. Jim, starting with you, as you described, you spent your career in oil and gas and participated during much of the shale revolution. So I'm curious how you view geothermal today when you compare it to your time in oil and gas during the growth of unconventional resources.
Sure. There's a lot of parallels. When I remember horizontal drilling in Mitchell Energy in the Barnett Shale, starting to drill horizontal wells and do multi-stage completions. There was a lot of talk internally of, oh, you can't do that, there isn't this, there isn't that. You didn't have the technology of whatever it was, bridge plugs, or people were obsessed with the type of proppant that you were using in your fracs. And at that time, people were only focused on shale gas because people thought that the size of an oil molecule was too big to flow through shale, which is wrong. So there are a lot of, you can't do this, you can't do that, how are you going to do this, how are you going to do that? And over you know, whatever 10-year time frame, that advanced remarkably, and the difference in what fed its all that innovation was essentially free access to capital. All the oil and gas companies were incentivized to invest more than 100% of their cash flow back into the business and grow their resources, buy land, get access to inventory, basically with more or less free money. Over that whole time period, an enormous amount of value was eroded, and as a whole, no value was generated. However, an incredible resource was unlocked and made the U.S. Energy independent. And now those companies have focused more on financial returns at the basically beck and call of the investors that weren't so happy over that growth period when they lost their money. So there's a lot of similarities in geothermal right now where people are saying, well, you can't drill that deep, or you can't do this, or you're never going to make this economic, you're never going to get costs down enough. There's a lot of naysayers, similarly, like there were early in the shale revolution. The big difference I see is there isn't that free access to capital, and there aren't enough tests going in the ground, and there aren't enough. We're starting to get this. Fervo's been successful in getting some pilots going and actually producing electrons. When I led New Energy Ventures at Chesapeake, we invested in several geothermal startups, and what I'd say internally is there's a lot of PowerPoint power plants, and we need actually real projects and investment in the ground. So we had a bias towards trying to get pilots going. So I think there's a lot of potential there. The resource was there with unconventional oil and gas. Everyone knew it. The question was, how do you unlock it? We know that the resource is there. It's how do you unlock it economically? But what and how are you going to fund that with is a big difference I see.
And Sarah, we hear a lot about, we hear different perspectives on how transferable oil and gas skills are to geothermal. It seems like most of Fervo, including yourself, have come from that sector. So could you speak to how transferable the skills are and what kind of skills, expertise from oil and gas are most relevant for geothermal?
Yeah, so I started my career in the oil field service industry after I graduated from college with an engineering degree. I moved to Rock Springs, Wyoming, and I ran hydraulic fracturing crews for Schlumberger. And I would say about 60% of Fervo's corporate staff have a pretty similar story to me, many more years of experience in the oil and gas industry than even I had. And I would say we have found an incredibly, well-suited industry to deploy the technical skills that we've learned, but it goes beyond technical skills. I mean, Jim was talking about some of the financial understandings that were learned in oil and gas. I think we have a ton of learnings about health, safety, environment, how to set up supply chains, how to do a ton of different things that are really, really productive to building new geothermal energy projects. So that's sort of on the corporate side. And then when you look at our field staff, we are running one rig right now in Southwest Utah. And at that site where we are still just doing subsurface construction, surface construction, building the power facility starts next month. And so doing the subsurface construction, which is drilling wells, cementing that casing, cementing them, performing hydraulic fractures on them, things like that, all of those people are coming directly from the oil and gas industry. And sometimes often they're actually performing, a frac job in the Uinta Basin on the east side of the state, in oil and gas basin, and then they move over to the west side of the state and perform our frac. And so it's a really, really interesting application of the skills that workforce has developed over time, and they require very little training, retraining when they walk onto our site. So we found something where we don't have to retrain them, but they are still able to show, a huge amount of pride in what we're doing because they say, today, wow, I'm working on a geothermal energy site and I'm producing clean electricity through fracking rather than just oil and gas. So it's been a really, really fun journey, and I think that's why a lot of people are coming to Fervo from the oil and gas industry, because they're excited to use their powers for the clean energy transition.
Rob, I think the same question applies to Greenfire, but it's also personally applicable to you as a former executive at Baker Hughes turned geothermal entrepreneur. So can you tell us about your journey from oil and gas to this space?
Sure. Well, and actually, I started in the geothermal side of the business, getting my master's degree at the University of North Dakota, and I saw just this vast resource of geothermal. So I thought EGS was going to be bigger than oil and gas at the time, but that's right when the Bakken took off in North Dakota. So as you know, the Bakken was a premier play of the oil and gas producers. I transferred that into CCUS, did several CCUS projects, then into oil and gas, and then back into geothermal. So I've had a nimble career, I guess, being a geologist, but it's these skill sets I think are easily transferable from the people and the resources that several of these companies have, and the people resources. I think it's the scalability, of course, that these oil and gas companies can bring to the geothermal industry. But I did want to touch too, kind of what Jim was talking about on capital and getting projects, and this is where it's exciting for Fervo and what they're doing, is because coming from a service background, we're always challenged on developing the next technology, the next tool. And when someone comes and says to us, hey, can you develop this? We can say, yes, we can develop it, but it comes at a cost. We have to take resources off and allocate them to develop something that is needed for the oil and gas industry. So it's a customer in the Middle East or over in Asia that we need to develop a new technology. So we know we can develop the technologies, but we need the capital and the pull. We need projects in the ground to actually drive the service companies to actually generate things. That's exactly what the shale industry did, and they innovated quite a bit, and I think the same can be done for the geothermal side as well.
Thanks. Sarah, back to you about sort of this hot topic that we're hearing in the energy world, this question of all these big AI data centers are coming online. How are we possibly going to power them? And it seems that given the potential demand and the advances in next generation geothermal, it might be a market signal for oil and gas companies to start developing business units to supply that power. Do you think that AI data centers are kind of enough to move some of the oil and gas majors into the space?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, if procurement and market signals were not already enough before AI, they should be enough now. I mean, there are huge tailwinds in clean energy procurement and firm clean energy procurement specifically, even outside of AI. And so, yes, I think AI is a huge market signal, sort of drawing people's attention to the fact that firm clean energy is needed. I don't know that that will be the catalyst that will sort of pull the oil and gas industry in. I think they're pretty focused on, is this a type of industry where we can do similar basin-style development that we have learned over the last 25 years in the shale industry? And is that something that we can go replicate the learnings that we have gained in geothermal and be really profitable? And so I think where AI really comes in is it plays into that profitability. We and others in the geothermal energy industry are showing that there's a ton of promising technology and really promising approaches that have frankly been developed in the oil and gas industry that we're leveraging from them and using and applying in geothermal, and then the profit and the market signals are really there. So I think that it's an incredibly compelling time for oil and gas companies to start thinking about geothermal development, but I also am biased because I work in geothermal development and not oil and gas anymore.
Robert, Jim, would either of you want to weigh in on this kind of question of AI, or how AI data centers might fit into this pool?
Yeah, I think in general it makes everyone take a closer look when you have those companies looking for energy and power needed to supply these data centers. I think there's several challenges, right? It's still the risk profile that the oil and gas industry is going to have to look at. I know a lot of the data centers, we talked to those that are looking to develop, and frankly, they're in the wrong location. So I think it's trying to help them and understand where do we co-locate these data centers with good geothermal resources, and that's something we need to identify and do better. But I think it's not just data centers. There's other security-based type projects. So we heard from the Air Force earlier, all the militaries, and then several countries in Asia as well that are looking for more secure behind-the-meter type power supplies. So yes, there's a giant need for data centers, but there's also smaller scalable projects when you think about warehousing, you think about military bases, and healthcare as well are needed too.
Jim, next question's for you. Some stakeholders have voiced fears about embracing the oil and gas industry and having them play a role in next generation geothermal. I'm curious what your take is on that, and how do you see this issue or these tensions playing out over the coming years?
Yeah, I guess the best analogy I can come up with is healthcare. I have a type 1 diabetic daughter. I wouldn't go to the pediatrician and ask for healthcare advice from her on my daughter's type 1 diabetes. I go to an endocrinologist. If I want to understand how to engineer the subsurface, there's one industry on the planet that knows how to do that, and it's oil and gas, period, full stop, end of discussion. And they're also one of the only industries that has experience in mega projects, in organizing huge, complicated supply chains, in financing those projects, and pulling them off. And so it's the only industry with some of the key skill sets, not all of the key skill sets. There needs to be a much bigger focus on understanding of thermodynamics and how to make these resources last for the life of a 30-year PPA and engineer that. But the minds and the smart women and men in the oil and gas industry, that essentially that's what you're doing. Okay, it's called oil and gas, but what you're doing is you're going in and you're understanding a reservoir of rock that has fluids in it and how to produce it economically and manage those pressures and do it safely, and achieve whatever the objectives are, and do it as profitably as you can. So I don't know. I grew up in Connecticut. I went to Hamilton College in upstate New York. I was a huge Grateful Dead fan. I thought the oil and gas industry was a bunch of evil dudes with suits with things like this that disappeared under their lapel. And I was completely ignorant of the industry until I was getting my master's for geology, studying Iceland of all places. And I realized I didn't want to teach and I didn't want to get a PhD. And my advisor was like, what about oil and gas? I'm like, man, those guys are evil. No, I don't want to do that. And he basically pointed out that I was a complete hypocrite, and that if he wanted access to do real geoscience day in and day out, have access to cutting edge technology, and access to data and understanding that just doesn't exist in academia for a variety of reasons, that's where you go. I was fortunate I never did an internship, was fortunate to get a job coming right out of grad school, and a month in, I was like, man, I'm sold. There was a bunch of people just like me who were super curious, love the outdoors, very passionate about all those things, and the focus on safety and environmental safety and human safety. I mean, there isn't another industry in the world, and I know maybe people don't want to hear this or don't believe it, but come and sit in on a Monday morning meeting at an oil and gas company, and what happens is you talk about safety, all the spills, and hopefully there were none, but what the issues were, and you have all the field teams in from wherever they're operating, sit there and listen to what's happening and share knowledge and how to mitigate all that, and all the corporate bonuses and everything are tied and stage gated to that performance. So usually, it's like, oh, it's this big bad industry. It's really not. It's a bunch of smart people that want to provide energy and do that day in and day out. And so anyway, yeah, it would be hard for me to understand the thesis of why someone would say you wouldn't do that. Going back to the analogy with my daughter, healthcare, or whatever analogy you can come up with, you're going to go, if you're investing with your own money, are you going to just, look on the internet and a chat forum, or are you going to go read Bernstein's research report and their sell side report to figure out if you want to buy an equity? You're probably going to do that. It's same sort of thing.
And just following up on that, I'm curious, are you seeing sort of those fears or potential pushback materialize now, or is it more sort of this kind of bubbling concern, and as the geothermal, next generation geothermal grows, that maybe that sort of misperception or fears could grow too?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the first part. I apologize.
Oh no, I'm just curious if this is something that you're seeing playing out now, or if these are sort of like conversations you expect to have more of in the future.
Probably from where I came from and where I was at Chesapeake and looking to invest in startups and also get pilots started, probably a lot of those opinions weren't spoke of with me because they knew I was with an oil and gas company. So I haven't seen that perception until became more aware of it joining Project Interspace and also some of the European startup technology companies we were working with, where we might have a site where we wanted to do a pilot and they're like, have these wells been fracked? Okay, well we can't do that because there's been fracking involved, and their funders were against that, so they had a rule. But I haven't run into a lot of it, and yeah. But it's probably just people don't say that wouldn't say it to me in the positions I was in at the time.
Great, thank you. Sarah, so we talked obviously about the market signals from AI data centers, the broader understanding of the need for more clean, firm power, also 24/7 baseload power, and the growing government support, including through GEOD, which is the Geothermal Energy from Oil and Gas Demonstrated Engineering Collaboration with the Department of Energy. So kind of with all these pieces coming together, what gaps still need to be filled to allow for the broader entry of oil and gas industry into the geothermal space?
Yeah, I think, I've talked to a number of oil and gas companies since I've been at Fervo about sort of their hesitations in the industry. And I think everyone is comfortable with subsurface. And like these guys have mentioned, it's all of very similar skills. And when you go to speak with the new energies departments at any of these big oil and gas companies, you say, what we're really looking for is reservoir engineers and geochemists and geologists and geoscientists, and it's all people that you already have on staff. I think the big breakdown comes from the power generation or heat generation part of it. We're generating a different product than the oil and gas industry is generating. And I do think that takes some getting used to on their behalf. I think we're starting to see many oil and gas companies engage more and be more interested in also adopting geothermal, not just as part of their new energies portfolios, but as more of their core portfolios. And so I do think we're starting to see the dominoes fall as they understand that the technology is pretty de-risked, thanks to them, that the workforce is there, that the demand signals are there, and all that they have to do is really get comfortable with producing power or building a power facility, which frankly are not that different than the midstream and downstream facilities they're used to building. And so I think it's really just pulling the pieces together that gets oil and gas more interested. And it may take some creative structures, it may take some real true power IPPs partnering with oil and gas companies and sort of splitting up the pie and saying, we'll take the surface part of it because we're good at that and we've built a lot of power facilities, and you take the subsurface part and we're going to form a partnership out of this. I think we have yet to see how it'll play out, but I think there will be creative ways in which oil and gas starts to dip their toe a little more heartily in the industry.
Yeah, if I can build on that, I think the biggest barrier is for public oil and gas companies is their owners, is their shareholders. Their shareholders do not invest in those equities to make a utility scale rate of return. They invest for a much higher rate of return. So it's the boards, it's the investors, and it's their owners really that are the barrier in those companies investing in it, because that's not why. So, right now, if your reinvestment ratio is more than 50% of your cash flow on an annual basis, you screen poorly relative to your peers. So, and most oil and gas companies have a variable dividend that's some function of their free cash flow for the quarter. Every bit of money that you're investing in something that isn't generating free cash flow in that quarter is taking money out of your investors' pockets, right? So it's that pressure is real. Okay, so it's the investor side. The ESG side of things has the pendulum swung a little bit. It swung hard to put a lot of pressure on companies with net zero commitments and things, and companies legitimately have focused on that. That pendulum is swinging back a little bit, and I think once they can see the cash flow profiles are different and complementary, especially to a shale portfolio, which 50% of your revenue stream, your production, falls off in the first 12 to 18 months, with a stable cash flow from a power purchase agreement. Okay, yeah, it's lower rate of return, but it's stable, it's predictable, and it can help when you're a price taker through commodity cycles. Once management teams can get their head around that, and their shareholders can get around their head around that, I think you'll see more people coming in, and I think the momentum is building.
And Rob, I'm curious, thinking about the gaps that still remain in terms of connecting oil and gas with geothermal, what are kind of 3 things that you would like to see happen or you think need to happen to fill those gaps?
Yeah, I think just to kind of touch on everything here that was said was really us trying to engineer the risk reduction out of these projects. So if you look at the oil and gas industry, they really know how to get a hydrocarbon molecule out of the ground. And there's many different ways to get a hydrocarbon molecule out. You can do water flooding, you can do CO2, you can do the hydraulic fracturing, you can do steam flooding. There's many different opportunities to engineer and get hydrocarbon. There's many different ways that we can do it to get heat, right? So how FERV was approaching it on utility scale, how we're approaching it with existing developers to enhance their recovery out of existing assets, and then several other technologies that are out there. So we need to continue and use the oil and gas knowledge and companies' expertise to get heat out of the ground. So I think reduction in risk is one thing, and then it's the market, right? So we talked about the data centers, other industries that are more attractive to geothermal. So it's been a great opportunity, I guess, to be a evangelist for geothermal in many aspects too, because they come to you and they finally realize there's not enough solar or wind out there, and they start to look at you like, you're our last hope. What can you provide to us? And so I think it's the market is starting to respond. We have these engineered solutions, and then it's really the technology. So we know we have the technology. We're already doing it. We're drilling geothermal today. 17 gigawatts globally is already installed. So we know we have the technology. We know we can achieve certain metrics, but I think as we start to go into development of new opportunities, new fields, pushing the boundaries on the technology side to make things faster and cheaper, we're going to see a lot of acceleration in this industry.
Thanks. And Jim, same question to you in terms of 3 things you think can or you want to see happen to fill those remaining gaps. We have about a minute left.
I think there's been a lot of progress. Projects like Forge, Geode, and some of the upcoming pilots that'll be funded by the DOE are important, but we need more tests in the ground. We need it in geographies which don't currently produce geothermal. You need some risk sharing of the people that want the clean electrons and give value to the baseload, resilient, 24/7 renewable power that geothermal can provide. There's technology risk. The oil and gas industry swims around in uncertainty and is willing to take risk every day of the week. They're not willing to take it on their own. So some risk sharing with the off-takers, I think, would do a lot to propel things forward and demonstrate the capabilities that geothermal has.
Great. Well, fortunately, that's all the time we have, but thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your insights, and thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Maria.
stuff.